It's time for position recaps and way too early rankings. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, October 17th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, no surprise, we are starting with catchers. We'll take a look back at the top 10 catchers from this past season and then compare Scott and Chris's way too early top 12 rankings for the position heading into 2025. Any differences, of course, will be up for debate, and we'll have these guys duke it out. But let's start with a quick look at catcher ADP entering this season. Get a quick thought there, and then we'll move into the actual players. Top 10 catchers in ADP were Adley Rutschman, JT Realmuto, Will Smith, William Contreras, Yainer Diaz, Salvador Perez, Cal Raleigh, Sean Murphy, Wilson Contreras, and Francisco Alvarez. How many actually finished top 10 by season's end? 6 of those names. So that actually feels pretty good, at least accuracy-wise, on the top 10. Realmuto finished just outside of it. Wilson Contreras was good when he played, but dealt with some unfortunate fracture injuries throughout the season. And then obviously Sean Murphy and Francisco Alvarez were just bad misses this past year. Scott, what's one word you would use to describe the catcher position this past season?
Underwhelming. It seemed like there was a lot of talent emerging at that position, and a lot of it didn't live up to expectations. A lot of the established guys at the position had long stretches of uselessness in the second half, especially. There's a few guys I'm sure we'll discuss. I don't want to reveal the names just yet, but yeah, they didn't live up to expectation. And then there's William Contreras, who was just an out-and-out stud, one of the biggest, clearest number one finishers at any position. Was him. He was he, yeah. And he? Yeah. No? Yeah. I'm doubting myself. But anyway, it's linking verb, so it's not an object of the... Anyway, yeah, William Contreras was great.
Yes, he certainly was, and that's a good segue here into our top 10 catchers from this past season, and this is based on Roto category leagues, and if they finished higher or lower in a head-to-head points league, I will mention that. William Contreras, the number one catcher in both formats. It wasn't really close. He outscored the second-best catcher by 74 fantasy points on CBS this past season, and he has now finished as the top catcher, William Contreras, in Roto 2 years in a row. He's been top 2 in head-to-head points each of those years. Set career highs across the board, hit 281, 23 homers, 99 runs, 92 RBI, 9 steals, and an 831 OPS. He'll be 27 on opening day. Looks like he's in his prime. And Chris, I still think that there could be this massive power season if he can lower the launch angle and bring the ground ball rate down. But even if not, he's still the number one catcher.
Yeah, I mean, he is established enough and good enough that I don't really think there's like much to be gained from trying to eke out a new edge for him. He's as established as you can hope for a catcher to be. Like the thing I wrote when I wrote about my state of the catcher position is catchers tend to take longer to develop and they have shorter peaks. So like we're 3 years into the peak for William Contreras. That's about as established as you're ever going to get for a catcher. Like he is 26 years old. He's probably not going to fall off anytime soon, but the way the position works, you never know. But yeah, I think he is the no question number one player. I know that wasn't the case coming into the season. I think he's clearly established himself as the top guy, and maybe there's more power upside. I mean, we saw it in 2022 when he had 20 homers and 376 plate appearances. The fact that he's averaged 20 homers in well over 600 the past 2 seasons, I suppose counts as a slight disappointment, but you've got such an edge in playing time with him relative to the rest of the position. You've got great plate discipline. You've got good power.
Sneaky speed.
He'll steal a handful of bases. Like it's the clearest edge I think you can get at any position is William Contreras, because I mean, we'll get to it. I guess we won't get to the top. We won't get to the top 12, right? So I'll just throw this stat out there to highlight the state of the catcher. David Fry was the number 12 catcher in Roto leagues this season. He was also eligible at first base, so we have a clear comp there. He was the number 36 first baseman.
Yeah.
In 2024.
That's catcher. Yeah.
Big. Like William Contreras he was not first base eligible, right? I'm trying to remember which catchers were. I don't think
No, he wasn't.
I don't think so, no.
I imagine he would have been like a top 6 or 7 first baseman.
Well, I can tell you in points leagues exactly where he would have finished. Second, behind just Vladimir Guerrero.
That's actually stunning.
It is. I couldn't believe it as I said it. Well, you get a catcher with 92 RBI and 99 runs. Like that itself.
Yeah, he was the number 27 overall player. He would have been the number 2 first baseman in Roto as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just ahead of Bryce Harper, and like he had 5 more RBI than Bryce Harper.
Yeah, those counting stats were bonkers, and he chipped in 9 steals this past season. 831 OPS, just great season all around. Great 2 years in a row all around for William Contreras. The number 2 catcher was Cal Raleigh, who finished 1 spot lower in head-to-head total points. So he was 3rd in that format, likely because he does still strike out quite a bit. But he has finished as a top 5 catcher 2 years in a row now, posted career highs with 34 home runs and 100 RBI. It's backed by an elite 15.4% barrel rate, by far the most among catchers. Scott, I feel with Cal Raleigh, you know what you're getting. It's elite power at the position. The improved plate discipline has helped him in head-to-head points leagues. He still does strike out quite a bit, but feels like you know what you're getting with Cal Raleigh.
Yeah, I would agree. And it makes for kind of a challenging rank in both formats, in head-to-head points leagues because of all the strikeouts, but also in Roto because he's going to be a drain on batting average. But he's going to be a big positive in home runs and in the counting stats. He had 100 RBI this year. Like, he plays a lot, and that is a big differentiator at catcher. The biggest reason why all these players who are multi-eligible, you're always going to play them at catcher, is because there are so few catchers who play regularly enough to hold their own at other positions. Yeah. Cal Raleigh is one who could because of how much he plays.
If you have a catcher that you might even consider starting at another position, you have a pretty big edge because there's only like 6 of them, right? I think it's 6 that you might consider playing at a different position.
Yeah, so I actually, spoiler alert, I rank Cal Raleigh 6th for next year.
Same.
And it's that group of 6 where they play regularly enough, with one exception. One doesn't play as regularly as the others, but Cal Raleigh is one who does, obviously.
Yeah, and it's not like he gets a ton of games at DH, but 15 plus games at DH each of the past 2 seasons for Cal Raleigh. That helps. That helps a lot at the position.
Like a 12% edge boost in playing time.
Yeah, he is over the past 2 seasons 4th at the position with nearly 1,200 plate appearances over the past 2 seasons. So yeah, it's pretty good volume play there for Cal Raleigh as well. Salvador Perez just finished as the 3rd catcher, and he actually finished 1 spot higher ahead of Raleigh in a head-to-head points league, mostly due to even more plate appearances because Salvador Perez, an Iron Man, and the Royals will just always find ways to get him in the lineup, whether it's playing catcher. This past season, tons of games at DH, more games at first base than ever before as well. So the Royals just really value Salvador Perez and find ways to get him in the lineup. He's getting up there in age. He will turn 35 years old next May, but still an elite producer at the position. 27 home runs, 104 RBI, 786 OPS, all his best since that massive 2021 season. One thing that did stand out to me, Chris, is that he had a massive April, and then he was just kind of fine after that. So April 355 with a 1013 OPS. From May on, 253 with a 736 OPS. I think for me, that probably feels closer to the expectation for Salvador Perez.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because he actually underperformed his expected stats by quite a bit. 335 WOBA, 362 ex-WOBA, top 10% in all of baseball, not just among catchers. Problem is he also underperformed by a significant amount in 2023. Actually underperformed by a decent amount in 2021 as well. Not quite as big, but 12 points there. So 3 out of the last 4 years, a pretty significant underperformance. So there might be something there with Salvador Perez that he just doesn't quite play up to his skill set. Maybe it's the amount of time he's playing. Maybe it's a big outfield, even though Kauffman Stadium is generally a decent place to hit. It is still a very large place to hit. And obviously, Salvador Perez is not going to beat out any infield singles at this point in his career. So, yeah, I think he is someone who I probably rank a little lower than the surface level numbers. I don't think I would expect 104 RBI again. I don't really expect the bottom to fall out here.
But
you have to account for the risk.
The role didn't change. The Royals lineup got a lot better. And maybe that was a fluke, but they do have other hitters in their lineup beyond Salvador Perez that I think is going to keep them on a positive trajectory. I don't know that they're going to be I don't know that they're going to make the playoffs again next year, but I think they're a solid mid-range team.
And I still expect 90 RBI. I think 25 homers, 90 RBI.
Yeah.
Probably more like a 250 average.
Well, the numbers Frank gave, numbers Frank gave from May on were basically his numbers the previous 2 years when he was still a highly regarded catcher. So he had that huge April. Maybe it'll be a different month that's huge for him next year. He is 35, and that is beating the odds for a catcher. But I'm not sure we should think of him as a catcher anymore. His backup, Freddie Fermin, is one of the finalists for AL Gold Glove. And Salvador Perez, early in his career, he was thought of as a good defensive catcher, but he's not thought of as that anymore. Yeah. And they probably just need to transition him to primarily first base, DH, which wouldn't hurt his fantasy value and probably adds to his longevity. So I think I was kind of down on Salvador Perez coming into this year, but I am back on board with him now.
I think he is the riskiest of that group of 6 catchers. I think Will Smith probably also as well. One thing I do want to point out, because we kind of skimped over it, Scott, you mentioned early on there were a lot of catchers who really struggled in the second half, especially. Mm-hmm. And one thing I saw, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but catchers have just been unplayable offensively in the postseason. As a whole, catchers this postseason have a 206 WOBA and a 31 weighted runs created plus. That's not quite pitcher bad, but that is worse than the worst hitter in baseball bad. And Matthew Trueblood on Twitter pointed out that 18 catchers had at least 78 stolen base attempts against them this season. That was the most that any catcher had in 2022. So it might just be that the new paradigm in baseball of players running more than they have ever, I think ever, right? Like 1914 or 1904 was the, might just be making catching a lot more difficult. And that's not a great thing. And I think that will change if you're looking medium term, because I think we all expect an automatic ball strike or challenge system to be in play, and that will change the way the position is approached. There will be less of a focus on framing and defensive ability in general. But that is one thing that I'm considering, is that it's just playing catcher might be even more difficult now than it always has been, which might make the bar offensively even lower. It's a theory anyway.
No, I think it's an interesting theory. And if you have to attempt to throw out that many base runners throughout the course of the season, we already know it's a grueling position. I mean, it just makes it that more likely that a catcher could just wear down as the season goes on. So, I do think that's an interesting theory. Speaking of the ABS system, I see that they're testing it out in some of the ballparks in the Arizona Fall League. I saw a video the other day of Tamar Johnson mid at bat, gets a ball called on him just outside the strike zone. He challenges it.
Yeah, you just tap on your helmet, right? That's how it works.
It takes like 5 seconds. They show where the ball lands up on the big screen, kind of like if you're just watching it in like a game day app or like on the MLB app, shows where the ball lands. and automatically either it's a ball or a strike. And
I think the challenge system is way better than an automatic system.
yeah,
personally.
I agree.
the challenge system looks really cool. So hopefully coming to baseball soon, but yeah, so far I like what we've seen there. Let's take our first break. Before we do that, reminder, you can always listen to FBT and our 5-minute podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, scan the QR code on the screen now, and that will take you right to the FBT Spotify feed. Let's take our first break. When we return, we'll continue on with our catcher recap. We'll do that right after this.
The Charlotte 49ers enter undefeated Naval territory on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Continuing on with our catcher recap from this past season. Again, the top 3 were William Contreras, Cal Raleigh, and Salvador Perez. The number 4 catcher in Roto Leagues was Yainer Diaz. He actually finished 4th in both formats, head-to-head points as well. He got off to an awful start and then picked things up dramatically in June. And the overall numbers finished quite well. 299 with 16 home runs, 70 runs scored, and 84 RBI. Scott, something that stood out to me with Yainer Diaz, the ground ball rate jumped all the way up to 51% this past season. And I think if that number gets back to 2023 levels, Yainer Diaz can flirt with being the top catcher in fantasy. 300 batting average, 25 plus home runs. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, particularly in a 5x5 context, I think the lack of walks, he's one of the worst walkers, is going to prevent that from being the case in points leagues. But Yainer Diaz is really good. He's one of that top 6. He and Cal Raleigh are kind of yin and yang in terms of what they bring to the table, because Cal Raleigh's the preeminent home run hitter at the position, and Yainer Diaz, the preeminent batting average source at the position. His expected batting average was 96th percentile, 300 batting average. Really hard for a catcher to do that, but Yainer Diaz has great contact skills. It was evident in the minors. It's become routine for him in the majors too. He did go from 23 homers to 16 and much fewer at bats. To your point, Frank, it seems like suboptimal launch angle this year, but we've seen him do better with that. And I think given his youth, he's only 26. It's a little older than I thought, but he's still, kind of right there in his prime. And the fact that we've seen him hit more home runs before, I think there's a pretty good chance Yainer Diaz continues to improve.
The number 5 catcher this past season was Will Smith. He finished 1 spot lower in total head-to-head points, and he has finished as a top 5 catcher in Roto 4 years in a row now. Dependable. Kind of is what he is. You know what you're going to get with Will Smith. 250 to 260 batting average, 20 home runs, 75 runs, 75 RBI. He plays a lot, but he's not the volume play that he used to be, or compared to other names at the top of this position, just because he will never DH because Shohei Ohtani is on his team. So, Chris, I think you know what you're going to get, and it's a fine catcher, but kind of feels like maybe the upside is capped here with Will Smith.
Yeah, I think the thing that I can't figure out with Will Smith, I guess, is, remember he signed that massive contract extension. Was it last offseason? 9-year or 10-year contract extension, I think.
10 years for a catcher.
He's still got 9 years left on that contract. There's a ton of deferrals. It's 9 years, $123 million. It's hardly onerous, but that does probably make me think that they're going to be pretty careful with his playing time as he gets into his 30s. He turns 30 right before the season. I think the chances of Will Smith ever getting back to like 580 plate appearances like he had in 2022 are pretty slim. There are some signs of decline over the last couple of seasons. The strikeout rate last year in 2024, worst it had been since 2021. Quality of contact, not quite as good as it's been at its peak. So it all kind of feels like Will Smith is just pretty good now. He's not necessarily like this huge standout at the position, and he's going to be 30. So I think in 2023, there were 7 catchers who had 400 plate appearances past the age of 30. Only 3 of them did that in 2024. So that's the risk at catcher, is just the wear and tear catches up really quick. I think Will Smith is perfectly fine to draft in 2025. I can't say he's going to be a priority target for me.
No, not for me either. And I was worried about the playing time being an issue with the signing of Shohei Ohtani, and it was. But even then, I think maybe I undersold how much of an issue it would be, and part of part of me ranking him as high as I do for next year, fourth. I'm kind of rethinking it like as we're talking through this
Same.
because he has the playing time. He doesn't have the playing time advantage, I should say, that Raleigh and Yainer Diaz, two players who I rank behind him, do. And Will Smith was one of the ones I was referring to earlier who, over the course of the season, his numbers were pretty awful. So you mentioned Salvador Perez's huge April. It's even worse for Will Smith. His batting average from May on was 216. And I don't see a lot of underlying reasons for it. Like he hit the ball just as hard. His strikeout rate was about the same. So I'm inclined to dismiss it. Who knows? Maybe he had something physical going on. Catcher's a physically demanding position. But that's a long time to hit 216 for a player who we consider one of the best at his position.
Yeah.
5 months, 216.
I tried to read up and see if I could find an injury or something little. Maybe he was nicked up. I couldn't really find anything on Will Smith. If there are any Dodgers fans out there listening that, they noticed something throughout the course of the season, feel free to let us know. But yeah, there is nothing that really stood out to me for Will Smith either. The number 6 catcher this past season was Shea Langeliers. He was 2 spots lower in total head-to-head points, likely because of all of his strikeouts, but continues to make big improvements in plate discipline. He hits the ball decently hard, and to be honest, Langeliers kind of just feels like 80% Raleigh, right? Which is not a slight by any means. 224 batting average, 29 home runs, 80 RBI, and maybe he'll get even better because his career numbers on the road are much better than they are at home in Oakland Coliseum, and we know that Langeliers will be playing somewhere next season, I believe in Sacramento, in a minor league ballpark. So, Scott, maybe there's a chance that Shea Langeliers gets even better.
Yeah, there's definitely a chance. He is. I made the same comparison to Cal Raleigh when I was putting together my top 20 catchers for 2025 article. But there are a couple distinctions here. One is that he's not nearly the caliber of defender that Cal Raleigh is. So while he's getting at bats as frequently right now, that could change. Like there isn't as much incentive for the Athletics to keep Langeliers in the lineup as there is for the Mariners to keep Raleigh in the lineup. And the other is that he's done it 1 year, basically. And so we don't have the repeat viewings to trust that this performance is something he can sustain from year to year. But it is pretty similar in terms of 5x5 production, what you're going to get a bad batting average probably with a lot of home runs. And that's at this position, that's going to go pretty high.
It does feel like a pretty classically flimsy skill set for a catcher. Like you'll see these kind of seasons pop up now and then from catchers who aren't, the established stars, where they just kind of run hot on home runs. The rest of the skill set is pretty middling. And I definitely need to see it again from Shea Langeliers before I take it at face value. That being said, I'm not burying him in my rankings. It just, like, he's 7.
Yeah,
he's
a tier lower.
It feels like there might be 2 tiers here.
Well, there's not many catchers that can go in that tier in between.
Oh no, that's what I don't think there's any. I'm just, there might just be.
It's that big of a drop off.
An 100 pick difference.
Yeah.
Between where I'm willing to take Cal Raleigh and where I'm willing to take Shea Langeliers.
And just so people understand what we're saying, he had 29 home runs this year. It was 22 last year. So like he can hit home runs. Yeah. It's just, does he bring enough else to the table that he's going to get 534 plate appearances again to hit 29 as opposed to 20?
Yeah. I guess the only defense I would have is that he has showed signs of improving, right? In the plate discipline, and he hits the ball hard. Like there's no doubt about it. 91.3 average exit velocity, 12.8% barrel rate, ranked in the 87th percentile. So I think he actually does some pretty good things there. Langeliers, obviously could be better as a defender, as you mentioned, Scott, but just as a pure power bat, I think he's pretty legit. So we are 25 minutes in. How have we not talked about Adley Rutschman yet? Well, that's because he finished 7th at the position, 2 spots higher in total head-to-head points due to plate discipline and just the volume of playing time. Down season, but it feels directly related to a hand injury that he suffered on June 27th. So through that date, the first 3 months, basically, Adley Rutschman was batting .300 with 15 homers and an .830 OPS. From June 28th on, he hit .189 with 4 homers and a .559 OPS. Chris, I mean, it is just one of the more obvious distinctions, I think, from this past season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact that he kept playing through it when he probably should have taken some time off, I think speaks well to his toughness and also speaks to maybe the need to hold him back a little bit. That's one of the things about player health is sometimes you have to protect a player from themselves. And Adley Rutschman's case, he was just bad for the final 3 months of the season. You said the overall numbers, right? From that on, 559 OPS, 189 batting average, almost no power.
Yeah.
You're going to see it in the underlying numbers as well. They were the worst of his career by far. I think you mostly write it off. And I think you still rank Adley Rutschman as the clear number 2 catcher. I think there's probably a teardrop between him and whoever number 3 is. And I'll take any discount that's available for him because he was the biggest bust at the position. He was drafted 2 rounds ahead of any other catcher on average in 2024. That won't happen again. He probably doesn't need to be that much lower than William Contreras. I don't think we need to overreact and suddenly put William Contreras in the 4th round and Adley Rutschman in the 7th or something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the only situation where I draft Rutschman, though, personally. Like, I want the discount because we all, I guess, are pinning a lot to this to this hand injury that cost him a game, not even that. And because it coincides with the drop off almost perfectly, I'm inclined to think that's what happened, but there's not a lot. It's not like we can prove it. And
sure.
If there's something else going on there, then it's going to be a waste to pick, as bad as he was in the second half. And I'll note the average exit velocity for him has always been pretty underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And he produced in spite of it. He had huge pedigree. So I was kind of just like, whatever. Exit velocity, stupid. Adley Rutschman is good. I'm not gonna dig too deep into it. But then these last 3 months happen, and it's like, well, is there something there that I missed, or is it just he took a foul tip off his hand in late June? I'm hoping it's the latter. I'm ranking him like it's the latter, but I don't. I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be reaching for him to make sure I get him.
Sure. If we get to the end of this year and the consensus is Adley Rutschman is Yainer Diaz with plate discipline, I wouldn't be shocked. And that's not a knock on him. Yainer Diaz is a good player, but the underlying tools in 2023 look very similar to Yainer Diaz with, a 13% walk rate instead of a 3% walk rate.
Mm-hmm. The number 8 catcher was Tyler Stephenson. He was 1 spot higher in total head-to-head points. A strong season, posted career highs in home runs, and RBI. He hit .258, 19 homers, 69 runs, 66 RBI, and he overperformed his expected stats quite a bit. So I do think there could be a slight step back coming for Tyler Stephenson. He also has one of the best ballparks in baseball, so perhaps that kind of helps cancel out some of that overperformance, according to StatCast. But Scott, Tyler Stephenson, he just feels solid. If I was projecting, I would say he's probably more like a 250 hitting 15 to 17 home run guy, which is fine, but not like a standout at the position.
Yeah, Tyler Stephenson is a top 12 catcher for me next year by default. I don't think he's actually that good, but there's a lot worse out there that you could get a lot worse at this position. So there are a couple of upsidey types that I rank ahead of him that I would be inclined to take, particularly in like a one catcher scenario where you could always fall back on mediocrity on the waiver wire. I don't think Tyler Stephenson is that much ahead of mediocrity, I guess.
Mm-hmm. The number 9 catcher was Connor Wong. He was one spot lower in head-to-head points, and he had himself a strong season. He upped his batting average from 235 in 2023 all the way up to 280 this past season. It's a unique skill set in that he has provided exactly 8 steals 2 years in a row. So you don't have many catchers that provide steals, but he also overperformed his expected stats by a ton. And moving forward, the Red Sox have a top catcher prospect in Kyle Teel, who got all the way up to AAA by the end of the minor league season. So I think there's a good chance that we do see him in 2025 and probably put the damper here on Connor Wong. Chris.
I think Connor Wong is like the biggest fraud at the catcher position. I will probably rank him as a number 2 catcher for 2025. It's going to be real low though. Like, look, the Red Sox like him. He started 6 games at first base last year, 7 at DH. He started a game at second base. He played the outfield in one game. Like, they really did not want to take Connor Wong out of the lineup. And I don't get it. He's not a good defender. I know he ran hot this year as a hitter, but even that fell apart in the second half. He had a 696 OPS. He hit 246 after the All-Star break. I think he got exposed there. I don't expect Kyle Teel to start the season on the Red Sox roster. I think if he has a good April and Connor Wong has a bad one, Connor Wong could just be buried.
So Wong is 19th for me. And the 2 behind him are Alejandro Kirk and Bo Naylor. So not exactly.
I'd rather take the chance on either of those guys figuring it out.
Yeah, that's fine. But my point is, like, I don't think many people out there listening hold Alejandro Kirk and Bo Naylor in high regard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's as high as I could put Connor Wong, was my point.
Yeah. And the number 10 catcher from this past season was Logan O'Hoppe, who just feels like he's going to be on my breakout list again in 2025. He had a solid season. He hit 244 with 20 home runs, which is obviously serviceable at the position, but it still feels like there's another level that he can get to. He underperformed his expected slug by 61 points this season. That was the 3rd biggest disparity among catchers. Obviously, the Angels aren't playing for much, so I think they're just going to throw Logan O'Hoppe out there as often as they possibly can. And Scott, something interesting with O'Hoppe's skill set is that he walked so much in the minors. I'm still waiting to see that in the majors. We haven't seen it, so maybe it's just not going to be part of his skill set at the major league level. But he walked a lot in the minors, so maybe there's a chance.
Yeah, that is weird. I thought that would be a bigger part of his game. There's still a lot to like about Logan O'Hoppe. He is similar to Will Smith and Adley Rutschman in that he just collapsed down the stretch. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could find, like with Rutschman, some kind of report about an injury he suffered at some point mid-season that would explain the numbers cratering. Because as late as August 1st, Logan O'Hoppe was hitting 280 with an 804 OPS. Mm-hmm. Great. Like he's one of the best at the position. But he ended up hitting just 244 with a 712 OPS. And in the span of 2 months, his numbers dropped that much. So I think the upside here is pretty high. I think, look, if the season ended on August 1st, I'd probably consider it a top 7 and have him right behind Cal Raleigh there, if not between Yainer Diaz and Cal Raleigh. But obviously that's not where the season ended, and the way O'Hoppe closed it out left me with some doubts. But I do think I guess we'll get into rankings in a minute. I do have him right behind Shea Langeliers because I think in terms of what they bring to the table, those two are pretty similar. It's just that Langeliers did it in 2024 and O'Hoppe didn't.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. And again, I just think I'm going to be pretty excited to draft Logan O'Hoppe because at least as of now, maybe I'll be wrong about this, it feels like he's going to come at a bit of a discount compared to some of those other names that we talked about. Obviously not Connor Wong, but, like that top 7 group. I think that O'Hoppe will go a little bit behind that group. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll hit some playoff updates, some news and notes, and some 2025 rankings. We'll do that right after this.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. Some playoff updates. The Dodgers, as of recording this on Wednesday night, they're up 2-1 in the NLCS. The Yankees are up 2-0 in the ALCS. I was actually at game 2 between the Yankees and Guardians. To my surprise, Luke Weaver actually walks out of the bullpen to Dream Weaver, and I'm pretty sure they stole that from Adam Azer.
It's been 9 years in the making, as far as I'm concerned. Whoever is running that at Yankee Stadium is a fan of the show.
Clearly listen to the podcast.
A long time
only
fan of the show. I can only assume, because there's no way anyone else would make that association with Luke Weaver's name. Not a chance.
No, it's impossible. I tweeted at Adam Azer. I kind of, I put him on blast. He's on notice that we are waiting for this sound drop to come in. So there's nothing else I could do. Anyone who listens, tweet at him every single day until he sends us the sound drop of him singing Luke Weaver to Dream Weaver, because obviously we need it at this point.
I mean, that's what they actually should play in Yankee Stadium.
That's
Adam
Adam's
Azer
thing. Yeah, absolutely.
It's Adam Azer. Yeah.
The most famous Yankees fan in the world.
Once we get it, I will tweet it at the Yankees account, which I'm sure they will respond, and then they will use it from then forward.
They better.
They absolutely should. We got a bunch of Rangers news that came out in the past week or so. Adolis Garcia will rehab for the next 8 weeks after being diagnosed with a sprained left patella tendon in his knee. He battled knee soreness over the final few weeks of the regular season. He obviously was pretty bad long before that this year. Evan Carter underwent an ablation procedure on his back last week. The procedure removed some tissue that had been affecting his recovery from a lower back stress reaction. The hope is that Evan Carter will have a normal offseason and be 100% by spring training. And Josh Young underwent tendon release surgery on his right wrist last week. The hope is that he'll be able to have a normal offseason after 3 to 4 weeks of rehab. Yet another wrist surgery for Josh Young. Chris, someone I know that you've liked in the past, but I hate to bring up the name. It's starting to give me some Alex Kirilloff vibes here. Someone who just dealt with that wrist injury over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's a concern for sure for Josh Young. And it clearly, even when he was healthy enough to play, he wasn't healthy this season. You can see in the quality of contact metrics. He just wasn't driving the ball the way he did the year before. I am hopeful that Josh Young will figure things out and enter next season healthy and avoid any issues in spring training. He didn't get hurt in spring training, right? It was early on in the season.
I think it was like opening day that it happened.
Okay.
Or the second game of the season. Yeah.
So, yeah, he never really had a chance last year. I think it's clear. I'm expecting the Rangers offense to bounce back in a big way in 2025. I think Garcia will be better. I think Marcus Semien will be better. Hopefully Corey Seager stays a little more healthy.
No more sports hernias, please, Corey Seager.
And I'm expecting Josh Young to be someone I draft a lot as a corner infielder in 2025.
All right. Apparently, Brendan Nimmo has dealt with plantar fasciitis in his left foot since May, and he aggravated the injury back in the NLDS. It might explain why his numbers fell off so hard this season. Brendan Nimmo in the second half hit 190 with a 595 OPS, so pretty bad there. Luis Arraez underwent surgery on Wednesday to repair a torn ligament in his left thumb. He played through the injury since late June. The expectation is that he'll be ready for the start of spring training. Gavin
and his numbers didn't really fall off, so
yeah.
You'd think that would be more impactful, a torn ligament in the thumb, than Nimmo's plantar fasciitis. But I even saw Nimmo said it didn't affect him so much hitting, just running. Mm-hmm. But even so, I mean, the batting average was so out of character for Nimmo that I expect it to bounce back next year. I'm ranked pretty high, actually, since he became something of a base stealer. again, oddly enough, while he was battling plantar fasciitis.
I do want to point out with Arias, there's a really good piece on Fangraphs by Ben Clemens talking about just kind of how the Padres are probably misusing him as their leadoff hitter. And it makes a lot of sense. And we've talked a lot about like Luis Arias is just someone who is just batting average for fantasy. Like even though he hit leadoff for a pretty good lineup, he still only scored 83 runs this season. And like it's because he's almost never in scoring position when he gets on base, right? Like he's just on first base.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Padres lineup would be better, and Luis Arias would be a better fantasy option if they hit him third, which is kind of weird because you usually want power hitters there, but he puts the ball in place so much, and he's so good with runners on base that I just like that's my hope. I want them to shift him a little bit down. I think it would make their lineup make more sense, and he would be more than just a one category player in fantasy potentially.
Again, that's Luis Arias. Yeah, the Padres lineup construction will be interesting for 2025 because I think there's a few different directions they can go. I mean, they can move Tatis back up to leadoff. He's done that in his career. And we've seen, guys like Ronald Acuna who are dynamic players. Ohtani be amazing as leadoff hitters. So that could work.
See them move Jackson Merrill up.
Yeah, he was the next name I was going to mention. I think that's a possibility as well. So we shall see. Gavin Stone underwent right shoulder surgery last week and is likely to miss the entire 2025 season. So for a Dodgers team that's always dealing with pitching injuries,
they're already down one.
They're already down one heading into 2025. So yeah, that is Gavin Stone. Ha-Sung Kim, who underwent shoulder surgery last Friday, is hoping to be ready for game action by mid-April, which sounds pretty scary. One step back, he could wind up missing a bunch of time. He also has a mutual option, so likely to be a free agent. We don't know where he's going to play and how healthy he's going to be. So lots of questions here for Ha-Sung Kim in the offseason. Colton Cowser had successful surgery on his fractured hand, and he's expected to be ready for spring. Masataka Yoshida underwent surgery in early October to repair a labral tear in his right shoulder. The hope is that Yoshida will be ready in time for opening day, although not clear that he will be ready or limited in spring training.
My guess, not going to be on the Red Sox one way or the other.
They'd have to eat a good amount of that contract for someone to take him on, but yeah, they might have to just because there are way too many options for the Boston Red Sox right now. And no surprise, but Nick Martinez is expected to opt out of his $12 million deal with the Reds. They could still offer him a one-year qualifying offer, which would be around $21 million. It's a possibility, but if not, I'd imagine Nick Martinez winds up with a multi-year deal somewhere this offseason. Let's get into some early 2025 catcher rankings, and we'll compare and contrast a little bit between Scott and Chris. This is different than years past because usually we just have Scott's rankings and we just go down the list, but Chris is here now in the offseason, so we've got a little comparing to do. So Scott's top 6 catchers for 2025, we have William Contreras, Adley Rutschman, Salvador Perez, Will Smith, Yainer Diaz, and Cal Raleigh. And Chris's top 6, William Contreras, Adley Rutschman, so same top 2, then Will Smith, Cal Raleigh, Salvador Perez, and Yainer Diaz. So it's the same 6, just slightly different order. Really, the main difference is that Scott is slightly higher on Salvador Perez, and Chris, it seems like you're just a little bit higher on Cal Raleigh.
Yeah, and I do want to point out that I moved Will Smith down as we were talking. I talked myself into it. He is now number 5. I'm not worried. I don't think there's quite as much upside there as the other guys. And obviously because he's 30, there's some floor. So I really think after the top 2, you can kind of put them in any order. And it just depends on what your team needs and where you're at.
So you said earlier in the show, I said I have Cal Raleigh 6th for next year, and he said me too. But now it looks like you have Cal Raleigh 3rd.
Yeah,
to further your point just now that
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what order you put Raleigh, Salvi, Will Smith, and Yainer Diaz in. And I guess I basically agree with that. I guess that's a tier. I guess that's a tier right there.
Yeah.
the reason I put Salvador Perez the highest of that group is because I'm most confident in him retaining like true everyday at bats because he's such a prominent part of the Royals lineup. And they've just, as Frank was saying earlier, they've been so committed to getting him at bats over the years, and to the point of playing him at other positions. So it's not like his body's going to break down. So that's why I have him first of those four. But I'm tempted to drop Will Smith from 4th to 6th, honestly, because Yainer Diaz and Cal Raleigh, I'm not sure what advantage Will Smith has on them. A better lineup, I guess, but if he's playing significantly less, that's going to do maybe significant. Is it significantly less? I guess so. Significantly less. You're talking about those other guys sitting at most once a week, and Will Smith sitting like 2 to 3 times a week. It's a bigger issue, I think, for his run and RBI production than the quality of the lineup around him.
The thing I do wonder with Salvador Perez is how safe is the playing time if Vinny Pasquantino doesn't get hurt? Because he played a lot of first base all season, but especially in the second half, it was, from September 1st on, especially, it was. Looks like it might have been more first base than catcher. At the very least, it was pretty much an even split. Now, they probably don't just take him out of the lineup in that instance, but he is old enough that at some point they've got to start thinking about limiting his exposure behind the plate. And if Vinny Pasquantino stays healthy, Freddie Fermin, like you mentioned, Gold Glove finalist.
I'm looking at the game-by-game lineup for them throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they prefer Perez at first base defensively to Vinny Pasquantino, because on the days when they had Perez at first base,
Pasquantino DH'd, yeah.
And if the Royals go out and sign a full-time DH this offseason, like if JD Martinez or something, then I would have some concerns about Perez's playing time, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll want to leave DH only, if only for him. DH open, if only for him.
I think Raleigh, we know what the limitation is. It's the batting average. It's going to be bad. I can't see the bottom falling out for Cal Raleigh. Like, even if he hits 200, I think he's still going to be worth using for fantasy. I can definitely envision a scenario where Salvador Perez just isn't very useful. Like, it hasn't happened yet, but he's 35. It's going to happen at some point. The number of catchers who were good at 35 is like 5 names long in Major League history. So
that's why I think they're just going to transition him away from the role, and it's already started.
Yeah, that's fair. But also I think the bottom could fall off for him as a first baseman as well,
Yeah. My only pushback is that we haven't seen any signs of it, right? From Salvador Perez. He continues to perform.
Well, remember, we were pretty down on Salvador Perez coming into the season. Like the previous couple of years weren't bad. They weren't special either.
Right.
And like we talked about earlier, he had a very special April, was pretty pedestrian afterwards. So I think there is more skill risk with Salvador Perez than certainly with Cal Raleigh.
All right, let's get into 7 through 12 in the 2025 catcher ranks. For Scott, it's JT Realmuto, Wilson Contreras, Shea Langeliers, Logan O'Hoppe, Francisco Alvarez, and Tyler Stephenson. And for Chris, it's Shea Langeliers at number 7, then JT Realmuto, Wilson Contreras, Austin Wells, Francisco Alvarez, and Logan O'Hoppe. The biggest difference here is that Chris has Austin Wells in his top 10. Scott has him down at 14th. We'll talk about Austin Wells in just a second. We haven't talked about JT Realmuto this whole episode, and the steals came way down this year. He only had 2 stolen bases where, normally he's 15 plus, and obviously he's a standout in that category. And that's just really what has separated him at the catcher position for almost the past decade now at this point with JT Realmuto. But he suffered that knee injury, the meniscus. He had surgery midseason. and just didn't run at all. So will he get back to running next year? The sprint speed seemed unaffected. He seems like he's still really fast. Do they just want him to stop running the older he gets? I think that's a possibility. But if he does get back to like 10 to 12 steals, then Real Muto could turn out to be a huge bargain in drafts next year.
I mean, I wasn't that tempted to rank him higher than 7th. We saw decline from him last year too, with the strikeout rate getting worse, and basically everything got worse in terms of like batting average, RBI, runs. He just seemed to be on the decline even heading into this year, and then he has even worse production. Okay, there was the knee injury mid-season, but it's not like you look at the splits before the knee injury and after this knee injury, and it's like, oh, that's what brought Real Muto's numbers down.
He wasn't running before the knee injury either. He only had 3 steal attempts before May 4th when he initially injured the knee.
He's going to be 34 next year. So he, like Salvador Perez, is beating the odds among catchers. But I think we're actually seeing some of that age catch up to Real Muto in a way it hasn't yet for Salvador Perez. And okay, he might give you a dozen steals again, but probably not with 25 homers. And I think clearly a step back from that top 6 where you're talking 80 plus runs and or RBI for most of them. I don't think Real Muto's. I think Real Muto's going to be more like in the 65, 75 range, even if he stays healthy.
Mm-hmm. His 135 game pace this season, JT Real Muto, 19 homers, 68 runs, 64 RBI. Again, if he can get back to just 10 steals, there's an argument for him going ahead of Will Smith, right? I mean, he would basically provide Will Smith numbers with 10 steals. So
that is the one of the top 6 that I'm most worried about, Will Smith. So yeah, I could see that.
Mm-hmm. One name that we have not talked about, another name we haven't talked about, was Wilson Contreras, who just dealt with some rotten luck this season. He had a fractured forearm back in May, then he had a fractured finger later on in the season, so he was limited to just 84 games. But when he played, he was pretty awesome. 262 batting average, 15 home runs, 4 steals with an 848 OPS, second highest OPS and third highest ISO among catchers over the past 3 years. The expected stats still look good. He hits the ball as hard as anybody. And since joining the Cardinals, they are much more likely to use him as a DH than we ever saw in Chicago. So I really like that for Wilson Contreras' value. The problem, Chris, is that like you can't say it for this year because the injuries were fluky, but you almost have to expect at least 1 or 2 like IL stints for Wilson Contreras throughout the year.
I would also just say I think I don't know if there's any teams that want to pay $18 million a year for the next 3 years for a 33 to 35-year-old catcher. It feels like a trade would make a lot of sense for everyone involved. You know, like the Pedro Pajes and Ivan Herrera looked fine in filling in for Wilson Contreras. The fit there has never been ideal from literally the very start of his time in St. Louis. So like, I don't know if if I'm 100% certain he'll be back in St. Louis next year. And I don't know what that means as far as playing time, where he ends up. Like you said, the skill set still seems incredibly strong. Like on a per plate appearance basis, he might be one of the 5 best catchers in fantasy still. It just, it doesn't feel like the playing time is as locked in for him as for some of the other high-end guys here.
So
just want to throw this out there, Scott, before you go. 2.9 fantasy points per game, tied for second at the position. So on a per game basis, he's still really good. All right, Scott, you go.
Yeah. And so there is, to me, kind of a strong 8 or 9 here. I guess that's where the next tier drop is after Real Muto, Contreras, and Shea Langeliers. But I'm kind of reluctantly including Langeliers with those other 2. And we talked about what foundational concerns might exist for him. I'm a little surprised, Chris, that you have Langeliers ahead of both Real Muto and Wilson Contreras when I have him behind, because it sounded like you were even more uncertain about Langeliers than I am.
Yeah, for me, it's One, Real Muto, I just think the bottom out potential, we're starting to see that possibility here at this point in his career. And Contreras, it's just, like I said, things feel weird with him in St. Louis. I could see it feels a little unsettled. And I don't know if he's as locked into playing time as a lot of the other guys at the high end of the position are. Now, maybe that just means he plays more DH and they carry 3 catchers and it's a non-issue and it actually ends up being good for him. But I just, there's enough uncertainty and weirdness there that it's relatively small distinctions here. I think it's a tier, but that's why I have that order.
Chris, when did you become such an ageist, man? You think the bottom could fall out for both Salvador Perez and JT Realmuto? What did they do to you? What's wrong with the old guys?
They're almost as old as me.
Oh, no.
And I don't want to be catching.
That's fair. Mentioned earlier, the biggest difference between your 2 rankings so far is that, Chris, you have Austin Wells in your top 10. Scott has him down at 14, and it was a very slow start for Austin Wells, and then he just took off in July, a 2-month span there where he hit .303 with 9 home runs and a .939 OPS across 44 games. But then he also finished poorly in September, and he's had a pretty bad postseason as well. So what are your just expectations for Austin Wells heading into, I guess, his first full season as like the everyday catcher next year?
Yeah, so I think the downside, the concerns, I guess, would be mostly playing time related for me with Austin Wells, just because he can't hit lefties or hasn't shown the ability to hit lefties yet. And how consistent have they been with the him not catching Garrett Cole thing? Because I know that was a little bit of a concern around the midway point.
Just caught him in the postseason.
Yeah, there was some talk of that, not catching Garrett Cole, but I didn't think it sustained. So it's mostly he's a platoon player. That's why I'm not too worried about it, because look, if you're going to get a couple of days off, it might as well be against the guys you can't hit anyway. He had a 526 OPS against lefties. He had a 761 OPS against righties. But the underlying skill set here is even stronger than the overall numbers suggest. He had a 341 expected WOBA, only a 315 actual WOBA. For a lefty pull hitter in Yankee Stadium, you certainly wouldn't expect them to underperform their underlying stats. So that's why I think I take the underlying stats mostly at face value. And I do think Austin Wells has the potential to be, I think there's 25 homer upside here. Honestly, I think there might not be 25 homers with a decent batting average is within the realm of possibility for Austin Wells, I think.
Let's wrap up talking about Francisco Alvarez, unless you have something you want to say, Scott.
Well, I will bring Francisco Alvarez into it. I just wanted to counter why I have Austin Wells outside my top 12 and 4 spots lower, is because I agree with the upside. I don't think he's going to get the playing time to get the 25 home runs. And look, O'Hoppe certainly has 25 home run upside too. Alvarez may even have more than that. He was pretty useless this past year, but I think in terms of raw ability, Francisco Alvarez has the most of anyone in this group, and the Mets are going to play him plenty. They have been playing him plenty.
I think they screwed him up, and I don't know.
He's so young. I mean,
I know. I don't want to give up
old
on him. I think there was a quote. I can't even remember who their hitting coach is. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's the kind of thing you're supposed to know, but I just don't have room in my brain for every team's hitting coach. But there was a quote from him where it was like, "We know Francisco Alvarez can hit for power. What we want to do is see him make contact and hit for batting average, and then the power will come." Well, what happened this year was nothing came. He was hitting for average early on, 296 in the first half. But there was no power there, and it collapsed in the second half. And I don't know. I know Mark Vientos has been a big success story for the Mets, and that's great. But between Alvarez and Beatty, I'm just I have questions about how the Mets are approaching their young players, and there's just almost nothing in the underlying skill set that he's shown at the major league level to be excited about. He has a 310
His
310 WOBA for his career to 301 X WOBA. His max X velo 115 miles an hour. That's
Yeah.
really good.
like 95th percentile, like the
That's-
high end power, the raw
but that's
power
it.
readings for Francisco Alvarez are among the best at the position.
But that's the end of the list.
But he's
of things
22.
to be optimistic. Yeah, no,
He's
I
22.
agree.
It's rare for any catcher prospect to even reach the majors by 22, and Francisco Alvarez has played parts of 3 seasons in the majors, or parts of 4. Oh no,
Parts
3
of 2.
seasons.
Yeah,
Parts of
it's
3 seasons.
basically just 2.
And
And he had the wrist injury this year that it's worth pointing out. Like,
catchers take longer to develop.
but catchers also very often, probably more than any other position, just flop.
Yeah, it's true. But I think knowing how much Alvarez is going to play and knowing what the pedigree is, however talented I think Austin Wells may be, I think you're going to find a handful of catchers outside the top 12 who will produce more or less like he does, because I just think the bats are going to be limited that much. And so I don't think you're missing out on as much by passing him over. Maybe I read it wrong and he'll end up playing a ton next year. He'll end up playing, 4 out of every 5 games. But I think it'll be more like 2 out of every 3. And Alvarez and especially O'Hoppe are, presuming good health for all 3 of them, they're going to have like 100, 150 at bat advantage on him.
Yeah. And Chris, you did mention this. I do think that there is a real chance that this entire season was just derailed by injury for Alvarez. He had surgery on his left thumb back in April. He returned in June, apparently dealt with some shoulder soreness in July. I mean, that's me giving him the benefit of the doubt to, a young player
And I think that's reasonable.
who might not deserve it. I mean, he's a young player, doesn't have a huge track record or anything, but as a rookie, he hit 25 home runs in 423 plate appearances. So if he can just get back to that level with a slightly better batting average, I mean, he's basically Shea Langeliers, right? And I don't know what their ADPs are going to look like. I guess Langeliers will be drafted higher. So if you're getting Alvarez at a discount, and again, given his prospect pedigree and just that power upside, he could make for a target here in 2025, someone who's kind of like underrated by the public.
And just one other note, just to kind of put it all in perspective, because we're quibbling Austin Wells, Francisco Alvarez. I have Tyler Stephenson ranked 12th, so we could put him in this discussion too. I kind of don't care that much at this point in the catcher rankings. Like it more or less ends with me, Shea Langeliers at number 9. Catchers that I think are worth valuing on any level. Yeah. My number 10 is Logan O'Hoppe. I feel a little bit better about him than some of these others. I think what happened to him the last 2 months is more out of character than what he showed in the first 4 months. So I might go a little further for Logan O'Hoppe. I might include him among the catchers I want, but I understand that's partly me playing favorites. I think the clear drop off at the position is after number 9.
Again, that's the top 12 rankings for both Scott and Chris at the catcher position. And this is meant to be like a bit of an appetizer. Obviously, 2025 is a long ways away before we get to, position previews in February and spring training and all that fun stuff. So obviously we're going to go much more in depth throughout the offseason, but this is, again, meant to be a little bit of an appetizer. And if you do want some more rankings, by the way, we only mentioned Scott's top 12. You can actually find his top 20 on the website. So just go to cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball, and you can find his article ranking the top 20 catchers for next season. We are going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.